the whole city was surrounded. We were not allowed to go out. And the Germans came to check the stamps. And who didn't have a stamp was taken out. And that went on for about 5 days. We were not allowed to go out. And people were shot. And there was blood running in the gutter. All you could see is drays with dead bodies taken away. And then we were told that there was a mass grave done, and even people who buried it were shot at the end. It was a terrible massacre. And when that quietened down, we had to move. That was a preparation for the ghetto. And the worst part of the city was allocated for us.
So the underground instructed the Judenrat, the leader of the Judenrat, that we're not going to help the Germans kill the Jews, and we're not going to supply any Jews to them. So in the morning, when the Germans come in and they didn't find the Jews prepared to go with them, they've been starting to run around the ghetto and collecting anybody they could. And anybody who was not like quick enough or willing enough, they've been killing on the spot. And this was, I was at work, of course, in this time. And when I come home, I find my wife and child were killed in this particular event.
Very early in the morning one day, through loudspeakers, the Germans, the SS people, they were yelling, all Jews out onto the square, out of your homes. Make sure nobody is left behind, because we will come and check. My mother did hear that about similar incidents, what happened in the neighboring cities and towns, that they took the Jewish population away. Where they took them, nobody knew. We didn't know. So she prepared for each child a little rucksack to put it on our back.
So we lived in a suburb which was not a Jewish suburb. So within 48 hours, our family had to leave our home, and we were moved to the Jewish quarters into a 1 room, 1 kitchen, little flat, and there were 8 of us, 6 children, my parents. Of course, no bathroom, the toilet and the water was outside on the corridor. And my darling mother, she was a very wonderful lady. So she made curtains across the room so that the boys should be separated from the girls, and they were separated too. And she said, please, don't cry and don't complain, because we are still together.
The ghetto was in a substandard part of our city, surrounded by a 3-meter-high wooden plank fence. It had 1 exit which was guarded from the outside by the Hungarian gendarmes and from the inside by the Jewish ghetto police, whom we had to install to keep order. And each family was given 1 room.
My father was taken away and sent to Buchenwald. And we stayed with my mother, my grandfather, and my aunt and in this flat. They started to bring in people from around the districts, and we had 2 rooms and a kitchen. Well, they said this is too big for 4 people, you have to share it. So every room was a different family. You can imagine the conditions which were there, but we tolerated it as long as they didn't annoy us. But in the ghetto, every day they would come in with those big German Shepherd dogs, and they would annoy us. They would attack people. They would say to them, "Man, catch that dog." The dog was a human being. The man was a dog. And the dogs were trained. They jumped at the neck and killed practically, or tore a person to pieces.
The ghetto started to take form. That was a ghetto. Hard to believe, but the middle of 1942, this person, I didn't know about concentration camp. I knew people were disappearing from the street. Sometimes I'd ask, where are they? Nobody knew, because the Germans were circulating a group of people, taking them to slavery, to work, to clean the streets, to clean German houses, and sometimes I was surprised. I know the person. She was living close to me. Nobody knew what happened to the person. They just disappeared.
But they also brought in the Jewish families from the surrounding districts, so that our number swelled to 4,300, just within a few blocks. We were not allowed to do our shopping, except in the late hours of the market days. There was market day every Tuesday and Thursday, open market, adjoining the ghetto. But we were only allowed to shop from 11:30 to 1, when all the best produce, of course, was sold. People had to have very, very modest lives in there.
There was big starvation inside the ghetto for people who had no work, because the rations that the Germans gave to the Jews were impossible to sustain one's life. So you could see people sitting on pavements on the street every day in the same place, and you could tell they were getting thinner, thinner and thinner, and after a while a corpse was lying there, and that was men, women and children.
When I went first time on the street in the ghetto and I looked, I saw carriages with potatoes pushed by hand, carriages with bread, and suddenly big carriage with dead people. It came as a great shock to me to see full big carriage with dead people. Later on, it was unfortunately very familiar sight, because it was dying over 100 people daily in ghetto, and sometimes even more.
They brought a big wagon of potatoes, and when the wagon was brought in, a few Germans were standing on the side, and they were laughing when people rushed to the wagon to grab the potatoes. They were laughing, and some of them actually took photographs. And then we were beaten away not to take it. And they really enjoyed the scene.
Meat, I think we had once a week. I think that was dead horses or whatever it would have been, one or other meat. It was made like with a sauce. I don't know what they put in, but if you're hungry, you eat anything. You don't inquire what's in and what's not in, you just eat it.
Sometimes they gave us some food. Sometimes we could put something in our stomach, but most of them we are constantly hungry. We talk a lot with each other, of course, but as food. How to make this, how to make that food, how to make a Wiener Schnitzel and so on. Like like a cook, because our mind was narrowed down to the situation when you couldn't talk or couldn't think anything else, just about food.
The cousins I was with were lucky. They were able to exchange their apartment with somebody, with a Christian who lived in the ghetto, and I was again with them. The conditions, of course, were hard. There was no possibility of earning a living. But my cousin was still conducting, to the very end, before we went into the ghetto, some business in a smaller scale than before. And I tried to sneak out from the ghetto and still attend to his affairs with the people he did business before. Of course, this was very dangerous, and my parents didn't have any idea that I'm doing this. I did this for quite a while, but it was getting more and more dangerous, the getting out and in from the ghetto, especially that I did not have any documents. And if I would have been stopped, of course, the consequences would have been very grave.
Then in June 1944 there was a commission, a Swiss Red Cross commission that came to Theresienstadt, and they wanted to show how well Hitler looks after the Jews. There was an action which was called City Beautification, Stadtverschönerung, and because the ghetto was overcrowded, first thing they did, they sent about 1/3 of the people east to Auschwitz. And they knew exactly where they're going to take the people. They painted the houses, the footpaths had to be scrubbed. They made a coffee shop there where people had to sit and drink this horrible coffee. They erected a little pavilion for children. There were hardly any left at the time. They put the square in front of where I lived that was just barren because it was used originally for exercises, military exercises, and we had to plant it with grass and roses. And they put a music pavilion there where they were playing mostly excerpts from Bizet's Carmen, which I can't stand to this day because we heard it practically all the time.
Most of the people in that camp, one way or the other, knew German, and they tried desperately to point out to the Red Cross that they should go away from that main street, and they should ask to go into a side street and have a look, and they never did. Not one of them, the whole group, would try to go and look in a side street into another room besides the ones that the Germans showed them. And the film came out. Part of that film is today still in Prague, and the Red Cross signed that they saw and that it was exactly what they saw.
It was a very big cultural life there, because you had all sort of people. From Germany came quite a lot. There were very good doctors, professors, musicians. You had in the cellars, you had lectures on religion, on philosophy, on you name it, you could do that. Some people brought instruments with them. If they wouldn't have a suitcase, but they would bring the violin with them or whatever, a clarinet. And when they invited the Red Cross to come, they assembled a jazz orchestra to show the Red Cross that we live a normal life there.
We had to sing going to work, which was prohibited before, and people were delivering bread in white gloves, which was absolutely comic, because the same hearses were
used for transporting dead people, for transporting bread, for transporting anything. When I was at home, I had a little dog called Jolie. Jolie is French, beautiful, a little Dachshund. I adored him and he was everything for me. Of course, when we went in the ghetto, they didn't allow the dog to come with us. 3 days later, when we were in this terrible situation in the ghetto, one next to the other standing, suddenly, and it was Sunday, and the Lord Mayor was coming to see his Jews in the ghetto, and behind him 2 gendarmes. And as he comes to me, in this very moment, Jolie jumps on me, cries. I took him in my arm, and from his excitement he made even Vivi on me, and hugged him and kissed him. And in that moment comes Dr. Megai was his name, and I knew him privately. And he asked, whose dog is it? And I still answered as I would be the same person freely. I said, imagine, it's my dog, he found us between so many people. He looks back and he said to the gendarme, Jewish dog. The gendarme takes out his pistol and shot in head the dog in my arm. That was the first terrible shock for me to see.
My mother contracted typhoid, and my father and I nursed her, and she got better, but we didn't have anything left to sell, and we needed food for her to build her up. And then my father asked me, would I mind if we will sell a little gold chain which was given to me for my 7th birthday, and I wore it all the time and I wasn't aware of it. I'm wearing it. And I said, of course. So we sold this, and this was it.
It was an announcement. Jews, I have good news for you. Whoever has a university degree is going to Palestine. Only people with university degrees. There were still doctors, teachers, dentists, people with university degree, with families still before going to the camp. Some of them came from hiding places.
In 1941, the transport started east. A transport was always 1,000 people herded together into cattle wagons and transported to an unknown destination.
We're jealous. Those people with university degree going away, going to Palestine, they're going to live, and we're staying here. But that's how it was. We said goodbye to the people. We kiss, we hug, we give them letters to family in Palestine that if war finishes, we all come to Palestine. We believed so at that time. And they were loaded on the truck, 2 or 3 trucks, and they were taken away. We still believed that time they went to the harbor and they're going to Palestine. But Poles, who were always anti-Semitic to me and to all my friends, came to night shift and they brought good news. They had pleasure to tell us good news. They told us they have witnesses, all those people were taken to the cemetery and they were all killed on the cemetery. He told the cemetery was overloaded, there's no room on the cemetery, and people who live close to the cemetery knew everything.
The war got worse and worse with other words that they lost. So they got more vicious, the Germans, and they wanted to clean that ghetto out. So in September and October 44, there went one transport after the other. There was always overpopulated at ghetto, and the ghetto was living maybe 4,000 people, but in one stage there were 120, 130,000. So there was no room, so they had always to send 1,000 people away to make room for the other ones.
There were 40,000 people all the time, only at the end, end of 1944, when most of us were sent away to Auschwitz. It became a little bit emptier, but in general there were 40,000 people. We lived in each other's pockets. There was never any privacy.
And there was a big pit, like twice or three times as big as the size of this room, quite a substantial pit, and that was very deep and a sandy one. And they put around the people around the pit, and I could hear fire, and that machine gun went through, and people fell into that pit. I don't know what happened to me, whether I just bent down a fraction before the bullet went through, whether I was that emotional that I fell, and I fell into the pit. And on top of me, some other people, they brought another group and some more people and executed them. And I don't know how many more groups of people they brought in, but during the night, I felt that I'm still alive, and I didn't know, at that moment I didn't know whether I am alive or that's how a person when he is dead feels like. So I tried to get out, but I was so squeezed down with a lot of bodies that I couldn't get out. I had quite a fight to get out, and I couldn't get out, and I gave up several times, and then I tried to get out again. And probably because I was so full of blood, my body was full of blood from other bodies, that I could sort of squeeze out after hours and hours of struggle. I squeezed out, and then I tried to get out from the pit, and that was a very sandy one, and I used to get up a few steps and come down back. The sand used to slip down back. So I ran around and around until I found some trees that I could hold on to, and I hold on to the tree, and I came out. I was only a young boy. I was just shortly after the bar mitzvah. When I came out from the pit, I went to the heap of clothing. There was a big, huge heap of clothing, all sorts of things. There were sort of things from babies. They brought in babies and parcels, and some women took their clothing, and I couldn't possibly find my own clothing. So whatever I could find, I put on. And I had all the time that sound of the shooting and the screams and the cryings. So that was so strong in my head that I really didn't know what I'm doing and where I am.